everyone. Welcome to another episode of Heal Through Humor. I am super excited for today's guest. He has become a very close friend of mine over these last few months, and he's an emotional health coach. His name is Ken Reed, so I'm going to invite him right now, and we're going to have a very dynamic conversation about... Hello! I was just explaining what we're going to talk about. How are you?
I'm really good. How are you, Talia?
Well, I feel emotionally healthy today.
Oh, that is good. It means I can as a guest and not as a professional. So that really...
Isn't that divine?
It really is. Lately, since I've moved to this new city in Australia, I've had a lot of people, when they find out what I do, come up being like, oh, can I chat to you about my stuff? I'm like, I suppose so. I mean, it doesn't hurt to talk about this stuff. But at the other time, I am thinking to myself, I really need to start good at giving invoices out because...
Right, your credit card is not on file. No, you may not. Yeah.
I know, but it does give me good hope for all the stuff that I want to do with my business locally. But anyways, we're not here to talk about that.
We are here to talk about emotional health and the positive impact that has in relationships. And then your post yesterday, so fascinating. I loved watching it and reading about more when I was doing kind of like an interview prep, but also research of what is emotional health. How do we have that? What is that continuum you were talking about? So let's dive right in. I want to hear all about it.
Yes. So I want to make it simple, and I also want to discuss the complexities of it too. So basically what I said was, and again, this isn't, I wouldn't be surprised if there's someone out there who's probably researched into this and actually given this a name. But for the purposes of this live, basically what I called it was the emotional health spectrum. So what I said that there is a spectrum for emotional health. There's people who are emotionally immature and people who are more emotionally mature. Now, the signs of someone who's more emotionally immature, despite their biological age, might include dominant traits of narcissism, dominant traits of avoidant patterns of behavior, or emotional unavailability, the inability to understand and recognize what someone's emotions are, and the inability to communicate those emotions. And the further up the continuum you go, you have people who are more aware of their emotions, more able to articulate their emotions, they're more able to regulate their emotions, and they're more able to easily communicate and also resolve conflict through those difficult emotions because they're able to separate triggers from reality and a whole bunch of other things too. They're not the kind of people who are like, you made me feel this way. They're like, okay, I can see I was triggered in this particular instance and that wasn't fun, and I'm working through that. Can we talk about it? Because I want to also make sure I'm not reacting in the same way. Yeah. So the reason I created that reel to talk about it was because I've worked and seen many people in relationships where there was a real imbalance in emotional maturity between partners. And to give a very clear example, there's one partner who is grappling with mental health, and I mean, it could also be emotional health too, to be honest. And they might be going through like a depressive episode, and they're really struggling to work on themselves. And the other partner is almost pulling teeth trying to get that other person to, work on their shit and to actually be present and available for the relationship. They're refusing counseling. They're refusing to actually, make positive changes in their lives. And they're almost looking for someone to save them. And so in this dynamic, it makes it very hard for this relationship to evolve. And it can also be similar at times to obviously when you've got more emotionally, mature people with people who have dominant narc traits, because those sort of situations too. And I'm very careful with what I just said. I'm not saying with a narcissist, dominant narc traits.
We all have those traits. I'm excited to explore that more.
Yeah, exactly. Because in this case, if you're dealing with someone who doesn't want to take responsibility for their actions, has got very black and white thinking, and doesn't also have the ability to, communicate effectively or healthily, then it does make it fucking hard, excuse my French, to actually, allow for that relationship to evolve, because you're operating at two completely different emotional classes. And similarly, even as coaches and therapists, it's much harder for us, depending on like our specific space that we operate in, particularly for me, to work with people who are at like a very different emotional space to ourselves. for example, I choose not to work with people who are in the thick of addiction because A, I've never been in that space. B, I don't have the skill set for it. And C, it's very hard for me to relate with someone who's in that space too, because I come from a place of sobriety versus someone who's in the thick of addiction. And addiction is still part of that, because if you are using heavy coping mechanisms to deal with a dysregulated nervous system or emotional system,
Right.
I can't really relate to that. So that's why I created that reel, to really illustrate how it can be very hard to relate to people and to create a healthy relationship with someone when they're in a different emotional level to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. How would you, if there feels like a difference, how would you describe the difference between emotional health and mental health?
That's a really good question. I think that whilst emotional health plays a huge impact on someone's mental health, I think that when I see mental health, I would say if someone is able to regulate their emotional health, it should by consequence have positive impact on their mental health, because they're in a much better position to be more aware of like things that are coming up for them, like, you know, anxiety, depression. They're also able to better, you know, work through those seasons that we do go through rather than being stuck in them. So typically, for example, if someone is sort of drowning in their own emotional challenges, like for example, if you're going through like a really bad period of depression and you don't think you have purpose or passion, you really are feeling quite lost and you're feeling disconnected from yourself, you are unsure as to what you're really meant to be doing, and you're sort of just like swimming in that and being able to go, okay, I think I know what I need to do, but it's going to be some very hard steps for me to get there, and I'm just going to slowly take my time to work through that. And your
Right.
partner there or your friends there listening to you and providing support rather than trying to coach you through that experience,
Right.
you know, by consequence, it does make it easier on the relationship. But to give you another example where it's much harder, and I can give an example of this, I flattered once with a guy in my apartment who I could feel just like his energy, where, you know, he'd mumble when he talks. He would, you know, you'd start a conversation with him and if I was talking to you, Talia, you'd like just suddenly walk off and leave me mid conversation and then come back to me like 5 minutes later. And for me, unfortunately, I know, like, I was like, I don't take that personally, but for him, you know, if I was someone else, I might have been like, oh shit, like, you know, is he ignoring me? Is there something wrong?
That he's done that, right?
Exactly, but it couldn't be further from the truth. In this case, he is just so like caught up here and unable to work through a lot of the stuff that he's going through. And I did actually approach him at one point and said, how are you doing? Like, can we talk about what's going on? Because I can feel a lot of what's coming up for you, and it's actually impacting me just, you know, in our interactions together. And in this case, he's more of what I call a drowner, because I don't think he's able to really work through a lot of that stuff. And it does make it hard for me, a person in the same room or area as him, to relate. He's the kind of person where if you were sitting in conversation, you'd feel like you were the one who was, you know, really pumping the conversation. You felt like you were the one who...
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And so in that case, I did feel a bit of an energy drain as the recipient of that. And I didn't feel like, you know, there was much I could do to support this person through what they were going through.
And I think also this highlights something that came up for me while you were talking, differentiating and kind of holding both emotional and mental health. Emotional health is a huge component of our mental health. I believe our mental health also includes like our biological health, our genetic health, our thoughts, right? If we're to balance mental health, it's a balance of thoughts and feelings. And so the emotionality piece, if we don't have words, if we don't think about our feelings, if we don't have emotional regulation skills, there's so much else that goes into our mental health, and emotional health and emotional regulation are a huge, huge part of that, as well as the way we think, how we think, and what ways that we're using our words to describe our emotions. Am I able to let you know, oh, I feel this? Do I even have emotion words? Am I so stuck in my head that I can't verbalize, or am I so stuck in my emotions that everything feels frantic and chaotic? And for those around me, they're like, oh my gosh, this is draining. How do you live like this? And you've, I'm sure, talked to people, and we've seen on Instagram too, they're so intellectual. They're
Yeah.
showing emotion with or connection with the heart or emotion, or they're so feelings based, it's tough to talk to them about, okay, you're feeling this and what do you want to do? And they're just so in that problem saturated story that it's up. And that's where DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, that wise mind, right, walk the middle path of emotional health and, you know, interpersonal effectiveness and your psychological mental health and thoughts. That's the balance. How do you honor your thoughts and feelings?
And it can be bloody hard for a lot of people because either they're two extremes in like either end of the spectrum too. And, you know, it's totally valid, but it does mean it's harder for those people, you know, are who are able to regulate and work through this sort of stuff. It's just like, you know, I don't want to make this sound elitist because that's not the purpose of this, but it's just kind of like if you were, say, for example, a pro diver and you've got someone who's just learning out as a beginner,
Right.
and you like push them down so they can like get under the water and they're struggling to stay buoyant, you are putting more effort into that relationship and also taking time out of your experience and your time diving. Whereas if you're with someone who's equally competent with you in this particular space, and it is a skill set, like it took me years to get to a place where I could learn how to actually, you know, comfortably emotionally regulate and be able to go, okay, these are my triggers. I need to take responsibility for them too. Like, I mean, how many people want to fucking do that? Because, you know, it's hard to actually do that in a world which has trained us to, you know, be emotionally unavailable. So, you know, without again wanting to sound like I'm up myself for knowing this stuff and, you know, that it's some elitist sort of thing, I think a lot of the purpose of therapy is really to try and get people to that, what you described, that like that wise brain of being like, let's have a bit more discernment, a bit more context, a bit more understanding of how we're operating, how we could relate with other people, and also not care so much about what other people think of us in a way that, you know, prevents us from speaking our truth.
Yes. And getting so caught up in the problem saturated story, getting so caught up in, oh, what are people going to think about me? And I made a reel on this I think it was like last year. Go with me on this. If every single person is so worried about what other people think about them, they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves. Everybody is walking around in their own head worrying about, what do they think about me? What do they think about me? Right? If we were able to hear inside the mind and then you pan to the next person, they're thinking the exact same thing. We so deeply want to be important. And this is my view, so important and connected, so much so that if we're not feeling it, we negatively make it about us and a negative self-worth story, a negative problem saturated story. What's wrong with me that fill in the blank, right? Or I'm too much, I'm not enough, right? And I'm not dismissing this at all. I have journeyed through that absolutely personally. And that's why I think therapy is so effective and helpful to boot. That is a story, that is a belief system that you're currently operating on, even if there are elements that do make it true, or you have some evidence of like, I could have done better at this, right? How can you be self-compassionate and give yourself love and regard along the way while you're walking that middle path and learning emotional health and mental, right, logical thought health?
100 billion%. And I think that it's very hard to achieve that when you're so like connected to your brain and you think your thoughts are your brain and you think that, you know, and you're constantly trying to curate externally, like you're trying to like, you know, create what people think they would like, just because you're so worried about these thoughts that are coming up that you identify with.
Yeah, we have you know, a persona that we like to be perceived as by the world, and then we have our ego and we have our shadow side who they're all in conjunction. It's like, well, I just want the world to see me as this, but I get very triggered and activated if they mention anything that resembles this dark shadow that I'm doing my best to keep tucked away, because I'd be horrified if anybody ever described me as these traits or saw me as these, for, you know, or accuse me of being this kind of person. And when I work with my clients, we go deep and we sit with that. I'm like, okay, what would be so bad about this, right? Why are you so high achieving and striving for all of this accuracy and competency? And typically because deep down they would be horrified if anybody ever saw them as incompetent. Typically connected to a parent was incompetent who failed them, somebody in their early life created this experience or narrative that no one's ever going to love them if they are incompetent, right? It goes so deep often, at least in my work psychodynamically, it goes so deep that once you get to the core and you're able to reframe that and reclaim it as, what does adult you actually believe? What's the belief that you want to carry now? It doesn't have the same sting. So if anybody accused them or saw them as, again, in that example, incompetent, they go, yeah, there are times where I'm not the best at that, and I'm okay with that. Immediately it neutralizes any sting that another person's view of you might have.
1 billion%. And I think that's the thing that I love about this work is the fact that you just quickly take a lot of the emotion out of a lot of the stuff that, you know, we normally worry about too. Because once upon a time as a child, God forbid, if we weren't the high achiever, then we'd be punished. We'd be told that we're not, you know, good enough. We'd be told that, you know, we're not getting, you know, presents for Christmas. We're not getting, you know, well, in essence, we're not getting the love of a family. And it makes us feel like a failure. And the child brain, this is also, I think, tying very much into this emotional maturity point, you know, the child brain takes on unnecessary responsibility for a lot of stuff and also takes on way too much ownership for things that it shouldn't.
Yep.
And I think that it, you know, it doesn't have that discernment yet in terms of being able to be like, okay, you know, maybe being a high achiever isn't actually what I want to do. Maybe it's because I can't connect quite to my emotions yet because I've got to be forced into this education system things to please the people around me, rather than actually thinking and feeling, you know, together, being like, what do I feel like doing? What do I enjoy in my life? And, you know, those things, those little breadcrumbs of like, oh, what do I enjoy? What do I like? Usually often lead to people actually having the life that they usually want to have too. I mean, that's real manifestation. And I did break that down actually with a great mate of mine yesterday talking about that too, because I think that for a lot of us, we think we want like the 7-figure business. We think we want, you know, the cars, the homes, the soulmate relationship. When it's more, I think a lot of that stuff doesn't matter as much to us the more we do this work, because we start to go back to what I just feel like I enjoy. And I think that's where the value of, you know, stepping away from our ego and stepping away from a lot of that nonsense of like external stuff and going, well, hang on, what really matters to me?
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about in the beginning, that feeling from childhood and infancy, we feel shame as early as 15 months, and we don't really start feeling guilt until around 3 years old. So shame-based parenting, though effective, and I really emphasize that in quotes, it may be, it's not. It's effective because shame is such a powerful emotion. I can ask you to think of the happiest memory in your life, and it's comfortable for you to explore in your psyche and go, oh, and it was this and this and this. I ask you to think of the most shameful memory of your life, right? Shutdown, intensity. We go inward. We don't want to think of that because it's so painful as an experience, and it's connected to, I want the love of my parent or caregiver. I'll do anything it takes to feel loved. I'm so reliant on you for my emotional health. You come from an emotionally immature parent, somebody who was using drugs and alcohol, who they weren't present at all. They were emotionally avoidant due to substances or otherwise, right? Due to emotional immaturity, perhaps not being told. I'm not blaming at all. It's just calling it what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Internalize that, especially on top of that, if they use shame-based approaches. Well, don't do that. You're going to make mommy feel this. Don't do that. Daddy feels this. You're making, no, that's very emotionally immature parenting, and it's psychologically damaging to your child, and it doesn't help them the way that if at all they think it is. It's not helping. It's really self-serving the parent, whatever reason, their emotional needs. And then you master that stage. Ideally, you're not feeling autonomous because you feel shame instead. And then you go to initiative versus guilt from 3 to 5, and you feel very guilty because you're not doing anything right. And parents come in and get frustrated and go, I'll just do it for you. You can never do anything right. You don't think your kid's going to internalize that voice and act on that for the rest of their life? So we have people developmentally in parts of themselves who are struggling with emotions they could have mastered at 15 months to 5 years old, walking around in adult bodies, wondering why they don't feel good enough about themselves. There you go.
Ta-da! Welcome to the world of needing therapy.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's 100%. And then, like, you know, that's why we have inner critic problems. We have people with low self-esteem, children who go on to become adults who never really properly, you know, connect with their emotional core and often develop those really strong narc traits. And, you know, it's deeply problematic for everyone involved because, you know, people then get the wrong end of the stick. They think that, you know, particularly if we go back to the high achiever case, achieving is the way to go. And, or as I like to break it down sometimes between genders, you know, men feel the need sometimes to achieve in order to feel like they're a provider and that they're
Sure.
striving for significance at the cost of their own, you know, mental and emotional well-being,
Right.
because screw that, it's all about being a provider and also striving for significance and saving people in their lives, particularly women, because that's apparently what they've been told to do. Because
Why?
apparently, yeah, because apparently women can't do that for themselves, which
No, we are so incompetent and incapable of everything.
exactly, that's what I thought.
I am weak and helpless, right?
Yeah, well, let me throw it over to you. Like, for you, I think, like, you know, would you say, like, for women, you know, you have also some unique conditioning that, you know, have come from, like, incompetent parenting?
I would say, or could you define incompetent parenting first?
Good point. Maybe not incompetent parenting because that's a bit general, but maybe more. Okay, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges women face as a consequence of, say, the institutional things like the patriarchy,
Mm,
societal conditioning, and
mm.
also messaging that may have come from a mother and a father's behavior? Like, for example, staying in a relationship that they know is unhealthy, continuing to bend over backwards for family at the cost of self, having shaky to no boundaries when it comes to, you know, family matters or, you know, other important details between intimate people.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful landscape to start from. I will share that sociologically and societally, the classic two parent household archetype is the helper giver as the mother, the one who has no boundaries, the one who is, I'll give you the shirt off my back, I'll go to the ends of the earth for you, who partners with the logical, rational one who goes to work, is the hard worker, right? I go home and I get the bacon and I bring home and you fry it in a pan, right? And so when you're looking at that being the dyad that you're basing your behaviors and your emotionality or not off of, that gets internalized. So does societal structuring get internalized, right? Men are this, women are this. That's not only Bun society, that's your own individual familial culture. Everybody has different lessons and views on this. So let's say, long shot, you have a wonderful template and a system where your mom is assertive and has boundaries and your dad has emotionality, right? The inverse of what we really want. And then you go into school and you see your classmates and your peers and their parents don't have that template. Those messages start to get implanted, right? And you can't live in a bubble. So I'm not saying the solution is never go out and just have a healthy family and never let your kids have any sort of connection with the outside world. Rather, women internalize these messages from such a young age because of, especially now, media, because of parenting out of projection, which is a huge chapter in the book I'm writing, that if you don't do your own work as a parent, you will parent via projection. You will, despite your best effort to give your kids everything you never have, sometimes you unintentionally give them low self-esteem, an eating disorder, the ability to stay in a long-term abusive relationship just for the hopes that the beast will finally be tamed by the beauty, right? We get all of this messaging from media and our own parents, not that it's intentional all the time, but we internalize that. And the way that our brains are structured with more estrogen, typically as women, we're so diffusely aware, we're so affected by the written word, we're so in need of feeling like we're in the in group, because in evolutionary psychology, I need to survive, right? I need to be important enough to be chosen to survive, otherwise I will die. And so it feels like no matter how developed or advanced we think we are, my life depends on validation and a felt sense of safety, right? I need to feel safe is something I hear from all of my female clients. I'm not saying that men don't, but biologically, men are much bigger than us. Even if they're not, we feel like they are. We are constantly feeling unsafe. And the more you rewire your nervous system and your emotional health to understand, like, what is a threat and not, right? Evolving the consciousness and our core drives, it makes it easier to go through the world. But a lot of this is innately hardwired into us and societally reinforced and conditioned into us as well.
100 billion percent. Not to mention trauma on top of that too. And
Exactly.
the way the environment plays a huge role in that as well. when you've got an environment where women feel, you know, generally unsafe to go out at night too, then it does reinforce that almost learned helplessness in the face of, you know, just everyday interaction. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes I think incredibly difficult for women to grow up feeling like they have their back, that they actually can look after themselves in a world that's, you know, incredibly hostile and threatening to women. And, you know, I think that there's just layers and layers of complexity to this entire experience for men and women in how they're able to operate in a healthy, functional way in a society and in a world that is deeply dysfunctional at its core. And unfortunately, I think it's one of those things where, you know, kind of, I love what you said, which is, you know, even if in the best of circumstances, you have that emotional balance with, like, you know, a father who's emotionally available and a mother who's able to assert boundaries and actually create an element of safety for herself, in addition to having that from her partner. That child will go out into the world and be met with like this contradicting evidence, to which I say, unfortunately in society, we kind of got to have to allow that, because people need to figure out their truth their own way. And it's why I think, you know, one thing I'm grateful for is the fact that it, you know, whilst it did take me a long time to figure out what my truth was and what I like and what I don't like, what my values are, that's really just a part of, you know, I think the world we're in right now. And the fact that, you know, I think you've almost got to kind of go through the muck within reason in order to get to the place that you want to be, and to figure out a few dead ends. Or as actually Dr. Ramani used this phrase and I loved it and I've been using it since. She basically said, you need to get lost to find your way.
Mm-hmm.
And of course we don't want to get too lost to the point that we're in like an extremely abusive situation. Like, that's not ideal. But sometimes those moments of getting so far lost helps us realize this is so not where we need to be, and it does help reorientate our path.
Mm-hmm. And being able to really understand that, you know, the best laid plans, as the short saying goes, still equipping your children with the good enough parenting, at least an analysis of the goal. You don't have to be perfect,
No.
but strive to have balance, strive to have emotional, physical, relational safety, strive to have, be a good example of that. And additionally, when you're looking at what that experience is like internally, personality wise, when you were talking about women, studies have shown also, and this touches on a very trending, I would say, topic
Mm-hmm.
of these dark triad personality traits of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, that is the most attractive to young women and developing women. And back in the day, right, even just a few decades ago, what the age of marriage was is much younger than it currently is. So you find these young women who feel societal pressure to partner with who they want. They like the bad boy because it either confirms a low self-worth narrative, or it pisses off their parents enough to where their parents leave them alone and they finally get the autonomy they've always wanted. And then they person, and then 10 to 20 years later, they're trying to co-parent with somebody who has those traits. And they're like, oh, this was sexy when you were 20, babe, but like the motorcycle's got to go. We got to get there's this lack of attraction to those traits, except we've done these societal roles of getting married and partnering and having children, so much so that even if we get divorced, we're going to be connected to that person in some way for life. And so being very mindful, you are more, and research shows this, you are more susceptible as a young woman to find those dark triad personality traits so attractive. That does diminish as you get older. The effect of those traits being attractive diminishes as you get older.
Well, I think maybe it's not necessarily biological age, but I think it's more emotional age, because I think the more
Very,
you learn responsibility, and also the more you have to learn about, you know, leading a life where you need to pay your bills, you need to also raise children, if that's something that you're getting equipped with, if that's something where, you know, you actually start to realize my needs matter in this relationship and I actually need to start, you know, putting myself first, then those traits become increasingly incompetent rather than sexy. And I just saw, by the way, Nama de Silva, thank you for your commentary throughout this entire live. It's been awesome. I saw that you mentioned why are the traits of the bad boy or the bad girl sexy? Oh, let me tell you, like, it is, like, even from my days, and for a bit of context, I'm gay. So for me, like, when I've seen guys who are like that, oh man, it is like kryptonite, because you get a sense of freedom exhilaration. You get a sense of like, we can break the rules and have, you know, sexy times doing all the kinds of things that we couldn't do within a very controlled environment, particularly if you came from a very controlled or rigid family dynamic structure. And so, you know, and this is a real trait through relationships, I find. We yearn for what we don't have. And so in many cases, though, that sense of like wildness, freedom, or traits that they may appear to have that we don't, becomes extremely magnetizing for us. And, you know, that can also lead to those highly chemically bonded experiences between another person, because you get so sucked into the whole magic of, well, the magic of that thing, that you think you've known this person your entire life because you've gone through similar experiences, and you think you've known each other your entire lives, and so on.
And I will also add that there's a continuum of self, +5 being very narcissistic and -5 being very codependent, and it exists on a continuum. 0 is the ideal. 0 meaning I am regulated, I am not on one end of the extreme or the other. That when you have this very pathological narcissism, it's more likely to neutralize. Again, +5 and -5 equals what? 0. You're more likely to get to that neutral standpoint of homeostasis, which all humans seek, because we feel less chaotic. The inverse of this we'll go into in a moment, but we feel less chaotic if we're trying to get to 0. Your task in life is to get as close to 0 on your own as possible, so you are not likely to be susceptible to either end of that continuum of self. Again, +5 being pathological narcissism, -5 being severe codependency. These are not diagnoses. These are just terms for certain traits that happen to be typically embodied by those labels. That if I am really meek, if I have not been taught how to be assertive, if I don't want to be under my parents' thumb anymore, right? Any and all of the above and more. Water seeks its own level, but it also seeks kind of an opposition in some ways of, ooh, I'm just curious enough about that to want a scoop of it, right? I don't have those skills, so what am I going to do? Social learning theory, right? Albert Bandura, I'm going to go be around the person who has those skills and traits. And when you're a giver woman who's typically, again, more on that -5 codependency, you look at that +5 narcissism and you're like, oh, devil may care, this is so sexy and hot, and you have this reckless disregard for society, right? Which in a small dose is like edgy and assertive, but in a large dose is sociopathic usually. So you have this balance in this continuum, and you mix that with the other traits that usually go along with somebody who has those dark triad personality traits. You're going to attract somebody who is maybe very agreeable, right? Whereas dark triad is usually very disagreeable. You're going to be with somebody who is very, very open potentially, and you're not as open. So you want to go have these new experiences, and they're exhibiting these traits, and they're not neurotic at all. They're not anxious and stressed, which is typically how we define neuroticism. If I'm highly neurotic and I'm anxious about everything, and I have this person cheerleading me into all these things I've always been so afraid to do, why would I not be attracted to that? Right?
100 billion%. And I also think too that this is, again, tying back into emotional health. Usually people who exhibit these dark triad, these come with a lot of emotional dysregulation too. And innately, I think we can even feel a bit of that too. Like, I know I find that people who, you know, are very external validating seeking usually carry a lot of social anxiety around as well. And it can kind of come off in their behavior where they exhibit, you know, how do I put it? They exhibit signs of like low self-esteem, sure, but they also tend to be very image conscious and very focused on, you know, how others perceive them. And they're almost worried to put their opinion out there because they're worried about, you know, being judged. Or if they do, they may tend to judge other people for having a different opinion to them. And so as a consequence, you know, this is where I love the wisdom of the body and also the emotional intelligence. There is innate wisdom inside of us that does start to pick up, you know, all of this stuff along the way. You know, if you've had enough time with, you know, the dark, edgy bad boys, eventually you'll pick up a lot of information which turns into terror because you realize, oh, this is not healthy or this isn't safe. That by the time you start to see it in other people who you've just met, something in your gut may just drop. You may get like a tension in your chest.
Right.
And it's like, ooh, that's a familiar feeling that I don't like. And it can be things that just seem so small. And people around you, when you question it, people around you might go, what are you talking about? They seem like a great person. I don't understand why you're saying that. But this is part of the learning, is to really go deep inside of yourself and go, no, I felt something a bit unusual there that doesn't agree with me, and actually learning to trust that too. And that's part of that development that, I think is essential, because if you keep ignoring that, you then keep allowing for more of the same to occur. Like the other day, I remember I was voice messaging someone who I was going to date, and something in that conversation just took me for a tailspin. I remember he said something like, oh, it's wonderful to meet a guy who just seems to have their head switched on. It's very rare these days. And I remember something inside of me just felt so wrong with the way he said it, and even like the tone of the way he was saying it too. And I even, with curiosity, went back and was just like, can you please explain, like, what your version of switched off would be? I'm really curious to know what that's been like for you. Haven't heard from him since. But, for me, I'm like, you might look on that and go, oh, well, you didn't give that a chance, or you ruined that relationship experience. And that's sort of thoughts and feelings that sometimes people have when they're so caught up in that thing of being like, well, you need to impress the other person. And when you get to a stage of more emotional maturity, you're like, I ain't got time to play with people who, don't make me feel safe. I don't have time to waste on people, in terms of trying to show them what they need to see. Or no, I don't want to show them what they want to see. I would much rather, authentically show who I am. And this is something I caught on your last live that you did about a week ago, Talia, where I think your guest was saying, in dating, if you are more authentic, you're going to have less swipes, more rejection.
Yes.
And is so fucking bad. I would much rather, and for me, that's how I enjoy dating. I would much rather show up exactly who I am and stay in that lane and just allow for things to come my way, rather than try and impress the masses with sexy photos and really betraying who I am as a person.
Yes, we talked about quantity over quality. I talked about that in another interview I did this morning as well, that yes, you will have less quantity. And if quantity is your goal for dating experience, if you're new to it, and dating is data collection, as I like to say, if you want to collect more data and have an experience of who you like, who you don't like, etc., fine. You can definitely you can do anything you want. You don't have to do anything anybody else tells you to do. You can go for quantity over quality. If you are very intentional about dating, you've done your inner work, you continue to do your inner work, and you're clear on what you will want, what you will and will not settle for, what you desire to settle into, right? Two different kinds of the word settling there, operationally defined, that you will get less quantity matches because you're being so diligent about weeding them in and out. Right. And it doesn't mean give no one a chance. It means very clearly you've identified your boundaries, standards, expectations, and ultimatums so finely tuned, of course, willing to adjust if you need, but so finely tuned, you're not going to get wolf in sheep's clothing by the guy who's only wanting fun and adventure, which there's nothing wrong with. If you desire marriage and children, dating somebody at the stage of development in their life where they want fun and adventure, it's incompatible and often mutually exclusive, unless you somehow convince them to do so, in which case resentment is going to be tailing along, right? So really being clear what kind of matches you want and not settling until you find that, while also keeping a very open mind of they may look different than you expect. They may have a different career than you desire, and they may not have exactly every single trait that you want. But if you have the same core values, if you have very similar lifestyles, if you have similar desires for your future, meaning you do or don't want children, right? Things that are very, very quickly going to come up. Hopefully, if you're having those intellectual conversations early in dating, be clear from the start. And yeah, it's raw and vulnerable being your authentic. And I'm not saying trauma bond and lay out all of your deepest stuff. That's not what I'm saying by being authentic in your profile or on your dates. Be you. Discover who you are. Date from that place. So if somebody says, hey, thanks so much, this actually isn't a good fit for me, you can be like, thank you for not wasting my time and lying to me that I, as my most authentic self, am a good fit when I'm not for you. Because especially for women, it starts to slowly erode at your self-worth. The more and more you're authentic and the more and more you get lied to, it is difficult to not believe that not all men are liars. And then in my analytic work, I ask them, what do you get out of going for somebody who continues to be like this? Why is this pattern so attractive to you? let's do some more shadow work around that low self-worth to clear it out. Ideally, not once and for all, but like so much so that you know it's not going to be flaring up as often as it is.
Yeah, I 100 billion% agree. And often in my work, I often get, it's good to understand like where that comes from and like the desire for those kind of people come from, because usually it's a case of like, oh, well, I never received that as a child. It's like, yeah, well, don't get that from the other person. Get that for yourself. Go
Go
and
to
feel
therapy and have a corrective emotional experience of that. Your partner is not going to reparent you.
no, and your partner shouldn't also be your source of income. Your partner shouldn't have,
Correct.
the lifestyle that you desire. Your partner should, what I mean by that is you should have a lifestyle and they should also have a lifestyle. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be, I want them to fulfill the fantasy for me. No, don't do that. Because
No.
then, because exactly what you said, like it's going to create resentment. It's not authentic. It's not also healthy at all. You feel like your life is contingent on the other person. And
Right.
again, go back to that emotional health spectrum where it's kind of like you're still operating from an emotionally immature class, because essentially you're a baby. You're looking for
Yeah.
someone to to be there and to solve all your problems. And that's lovely if you can find someone who also loves saving people, in which case date. You two are perfect together. But for the love of God, stay out of the authentic pool, because that's not what we want.
Yes. Keep that to yourself. Yeah. Yeah. And it's difficult, I think, too, when you have these unmet needs that are very deep down and often unbeknownst to you, right? There are a lot of people out there who will listen to this or are listening to this that don't have their own needs identified, whether it's I don't feel safe to, I don't have space to, I haven't had a desire to, right? Any of and all of the above and more. You have to have those identified in order to be able to ask a partner for them, and be okay if your partner says no. It's a request, not a demand. We have
Mhm.
this delusional belief that once we get into this relationship, the person's going to read our mind, know exactly what we need, even before we need it, because we've sexualized that and romanticized that in society. And to boot, they're supposed to be everything and more. If you are so reliant on your partner that you can't leave, whether it's emotionally, financially, right? Like you've built a life with them so much so that you don't have a self when you leave. That's a serious warning sign to look inward and go, okay, how can I bolster my independence? And how can I feel like I'm a competent individual as part of a partnership, right? Interdependence is the goal, not codependence.
100%. And it's also important to say at this point that not everyone will get there, and that's okay.
Yes, true.
Which
Very
I, to get to, and like, I mean, that's why for me, I'm like, well, look, it's good just to date at your emotional level. If you like sugar daddies, like being sugar mama, go for your life. Like, have it.
well. I'm not going to judge. Go for it.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And I've met people here in this new city of Cairns where people say things like, oh, I want to build my empire and have like this power couple situation. And I'm like,
Yeah.
like, more power to you. For me, I'm just like, I'm chilling, loving life and having fun with my business and doing, good work and feeling like all my needs are met and I don't need it from another person. So, I'm pretty happy at this stage. But it's one of those things where I think everyone's on their journey, and it's good to be aware of where you are on that journey, because if you're kind of lost and looking for guidance from the other person, well, then it's kind of like, bruh, what are you doing?
And I think in some ways, being able to look to your partner as a respected person who you would bounce ideas off of and seek guidance from, that
Mm-hmm.
level of relational health, I think that's important, right? Can you look at your partner and see them as an equal, different, obviously unique equal, but with respect, that you would actually want to be around them? You don't view them in a contemptuous way. You don't emasculate them. You don't diminish their spirit. I think that's so important, especially as women. I work with a lot of high powered women. They view men in such negative ways, which I've talked about ad nauseum before, why that usually is the case. It's your it's your due diligence as an adult woman to undo those narratives and to not confirm them, because then guess what? Yeah, that's going to come true every single time, right? Oh, my partner's so incompetent, lazy, this, that, so negative of you. I wouldn't want to be around you. No wonder why you're having trouble dating, right? Would you want to be around you? If the guys you were dating talked about you the way you talk about men, you'd be horrified. You'd feel so disrespected. You would feel so, righteous or, it'd be righteous. You'd be like, I can't, how could you? Oh my gosh, right? You get defensive. Yet when the shoe is on the other foot, there's this contempt and this authority of, well, I know best. Okay, well, you're going to be single. That's often the case. If you can't interact with the other person you're trying to partner with without being contemptuous and without sometimes hatred, you have to do those narrative explorations and work before you go and date, because otherwise you're going to keep attracting, right? Law of the universe, you're going to keep attracting people who confirm that narrative for you until you start to change the way you view people. And then once you are a safe person, you will start to see and be attracted and attractive to more of the people who are on that level of relational health that you are at now.
1,000,000,000%. And on that note, I have so much to add to that too. I loved everything you said, particularly one, if you, and this I see a lot, particularly in our community, where there doesn't seem to be a lot of help for that. And by our community, I mean the LGBTQIA plus community.
Right.
A lot of people going into dating carrying the carcass of a dead relationship around, and they'll come in and they'll overshare about their recent ex or ex of 8 years who they still, you know, are talking about. And it's kind of like, I came to a first date, not to a therapy session.
I'm not a therapist. Yeah.
Here's my
Yeah.
invoice.
Right.
Yeah.
You're keeping the check and I'm charging you for this hour.
The emotional exorcism I just performed will you and me a lot of time down the road. We're not dating, but you know, you're free to go off and be with other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so true that we carry that around, and all the more reason why being single, even if it's for a small amount of time, let's say it's a couple dates that didn't work out and then you want to lick your wounds before you go back into the dating pool, please do so that you're not bleeding on people who didn't cut you, metaphorically. And I did a podcast episode for my Couples Guide podcast where we talked about repacking your baggage. And baggage is a very neutral term, and I use it as describing, like, it's your life history. Everybody has a life history. How well regulated you are in describing it and having it be compartmentalized and processed is largely dependent on the work you've done and the time it's taken you to recreate the narrative, right? If the person is, I can take no accountability in my last relationship, they were the problem, it failed, I'm not over them, like, you're going to be crying before the breadsticks even hit the table, right? Like, that's not the person that you necessarily want to, unless you have the kink for saving people, which, ball out, go for it. That's not ideally the person, when I work with my clients, that they want to see. They want to be with somebody who is healed, not with no past, but has healed enough from the past to at least have an honest adult conversation about it and take accountability.
Yeah, 1,000,000,000%. I completely agree. And I see a lot of people who are still thrashing in the unhealed phase. Either it's blatantly obvious or it's actually masked in a voice, and it's compartmentalized. You know, I've seen a lot of people, and it's been wonderful actually interacting with people who do have avoidant traits, because now that I have a much better understanding of it, I'm like, I get this.
Yeah.
The mystery is gone. The self-blame is also gone as a consequence. And I'm no longer thinking, oh, what did I do? I'm like, oh, it's them. Okay, great.
Right. Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's just so good to know, like, oh, at least I didn't feel like, okay, that's something that I'll bring up in a minute. Like this feeling of, like, you know, when you've been dumped by an avoidant partner or someone who's emotionally unavailable, that it's not all you. It's actually, oh, it's something that they're working through that they don't know how to articulate. And I think the key word that I used that really helped me sort of downgrade that sort of person was, they're traumatized. And I was like, oh, cool, we're not going over there, bye. But anyways, what I wanted to say was, I think for people who are exhibiting those avoidant traits, typically what I find is they also engage sometimes in toxic positivity, because they want to engage exclusively on the fun, happy emotions of their life. Let's look into the future, create my career, and just be very focused on, like, the things that bring happiness into my life. That they don't want to touch the things that make them, you know, feel sad and hurt. Really great example of this, and this is a really great way to tell if you're not over someone. Go ahead and play breakup music. Let's see how you react to that.
Yes.
I guarantee
at your song. Yeah.
Yeah, I guarantee if you listen to Olivia Rodrigo sing "Good for You," go work on your shit.
It's on my gym playlist because it's just so inspiring to me, because I have time and distance away from those kinds of relationships to be like, I honestly can say good for you and mean it. Like, it's actually a positive compliment. I actually hope the person that I like, if I found a therapist for, is doing well. Like, it's a genuine thing. It's not out of that, you know, that
Malice.
Right? There's not that bitterness, I think, anymore. And that feeling of, what is it like for me to go on a date or try and partner with somebody after I've been burned before? Some of my best advice to people is, if I had no template for this, if I had never experienced any of the pain, and I'm not saying this like delusional positive thinking, like really try and get real with yourself. How much can I distance myself, even just for a moment, from previous pain? How would I approach this person if I had never had this history of cheating? If I had never had a history of a partner yelling at me, right? Whatever it might be. How would I not project all that stuff onto this new person who has really probably never done that to you? You're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. How would you date them? And oftentimes the women I work with are like, oh, I would do this. They already have the answers. They just need to get out of their own head. And I say, so why not do that? And they're like, oh, I never thought to do that. I'm going to try that. And then they try it. And as many times as they try it and have a new pattern, a new groove carved out in relationships, long gone are those memories of previous times. And they can get space and distance and go, yeah, at one point, men were fill in the blank to me. And now they're not. And I have this wonderful new partnership. And I love this person and I want to be with this person. And I've cultivated these positive thoughts and beliefs, not toxic, not delusional positivity, true, authentic, seeing the person in front of you for who they are, not who you want them to be or who other people have been to you.
100 billion%. And another thing to add to that too, I think it's really important to get to that stage because you kind of self-sabotage if you don't. Or actually, let me be kind, you self-protect, because if you've had constant bad experiences where you've been felt like you've been cheated and lied on, then you may preemptively try to, you know, do a smoky gun test when in fact there was never a gun to defuse in the first place too. Really classic example, you go on a date and you're still carrying the hurt of betrayal from a bad relationship, and you want to preempt that by never going through that experience again. So when you bring up relationship history on the first day and the other person says, oh, you know, they left me, and you then preemptively say, well, what did you do to cause that? Well, that's going to feel nice to the recipient. They're really going to want to continue seeing you off the back of that question.
I think the way to ask it really, and I learned this many, many years ago. I think I was watching the Ellen show, somewhere where Jim Carrey and what was her name, Jenny McCarthy, I think they dated. She was being interviewed or he was being interviewed, and they shared a very profound like self-reflection question. If once you're able to look back at your relationship and ask yourself and answer honestly, what did I do to contribute to the growth and demise of this relationship? That's how you know you're healed enough, right? However you want to label it, to date. If I can look back and go, they did all these things, sure. What did I do, right? Why did I allow them to be such a horrible person to me? Why did I stay for so long, right? And I'm talking caveat, obviously, when it's domestic violence, psychological abuse, that's not what I'm trying to apply this to. So please don't come out with comments. This experience of they were icky to me. They weren't respectful to me. They were kind of an F-boy or whatever you want to label it as. You're allowing yourself to put up with that behavior. Why? What is it about you? What view do you have of yourself? And once you, and in that small example, if you can get to the point of, yeah, they were not great to me, and I actually don't think I had enough self-esteem, relational awareness, or self-worth to stand up for my own wants and needs, and that's why I stayed so long, that's healing. That's growth that you can take with you into the next relationship for warning signs of similar behavior, and then check out just a little bit, do some discernment work. Oh, this looks like, right? Walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, probably is a duck, but sometimes it's just like, oh, wait, oof, we're good. It was just my brain trying to keep me safe and not get wounded again. I don't need to have that same negative belief of this new person I'm dating, right? Not everybody does the same behavior for the same reason is something I teach on a lot.
Which I think is so important. And it's really good that you brought up that it's the brain trying to protect versus the body. Like when the body is trying to protect, that is a very subtle, very different experience. And that's the one to look out for, not the brain. But when the brain's trying to protect, that's often irrational and dumb. And it's just like, no, brain, don't do that. We love you, brain. Please, 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 not now. And I think in the case of that hypervigilance that we get to, you know, what I love about the example that you just shared, where it's kind of like, you can look back on your responsibility and talk about it. The reason I love it is because if you actually express that to a person on a first date, watch their reaction will be everything. Because if they come back to you being like, oh, well, that just sounds to me like a cop out, or it sounds like you don't know how to, you know, have a healthy relationship. Great. You've diffused that.
October, thank you, bye. Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus they're like, oh my gosh, I feel very similar to you. It's so great that you shared that. Boom, now you have this pinpoint or kind of like a data point in your new relational data set to be like, oh, we both have relational self-awareness, as I like to call it. This is a good sign, right? They're not shut down and be immediately defensive.
Correct. And you've already gotten that pattern out of the way first, and you're like, fan-fucking-tastic. If that person wasn't going to be open and available to me now, chances are they probably weren't going to be open to me down the road too. And it's, you know, it's not worth it going in and looking for those patterns when it comes out like that straight away. It's like, great, diffuse that before it got out of hand. And, you know, I think one thing that I've learned too, particularly in a community where there are so many insecurities, particularly over being gay, being, you know, unable to feel safe in our own community too. You know, sometimes when I hear guys make comments about other gay men in a very sort of like toxic way, that instantly becomes a massive red flag for me where I'm like, let's go and explore that for a hot minute. Like, what do you mean about this? And the reason that's important to me too, it becomes like another thing I have to think about, you know, in relation to, you know, the emotional health spectrum, because if that person isn't able to feel safe, you know, as a gay man and actually have a positive regard for themselves, you know, they don't have like, I want to say like a boundary relationship with family,
Yes.
that, you know, that's reasonably healthy. Yeah. It makes it harder for me to be in a safe, healthy relationship with them, because I'm like, oh, it's going to come out at some point in our relationship, and I don't want to have to deal with your insecurities over our community and, you know, your beliefs about what we should and should not do just to make you feel safe. And it would probably be the same for a heterosexual experience too, where you have to try and get out of your head from all these norms and feelings of like, well, men shouldn't do this, women shouldn't do that, they should or should not, whatever it may be. And so I think, you know, part of emotional healing and being ready for partnership, and this again, I dives back right into the emotional health spectrum, is doing your damn due diligence and, you know, working through your fears, or as I say, meet your fears, talk to them and be like, okay, what is it I really am worried about? And actually just have that conversation with yourself and, you know, check to see if it's actually valid or not too.
Yeah. Question yourself in a loving way, like, why do I believe this? I've asked that question myself, to myself and to so many clients. Well, it's this and this. Who told you that? Right? That audio that's going around is accurate. Like, use that. Who told you? Oh my gosh, you're right. Or they realize, oh, whoa, this is from childhood. This is from, you either have no where it came from, in which case replace it, or you know where it comes from, go back and heal that, and then begin again from there. And I think this leaves us at a perfect point for, this is going to be part 3, because you've been on once before, but I would love to have you on again. I love our dynamic so much, and I appreciate our friendship so much. And I want to say thank you for taking this time. I have been really looking forward to this, and it's so nice to talk to you and to talk to somebody who gets it. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
No, it's my absolute pleasure. I can say the exact same to you, Talia. I really am grateful for the friendship that we've been able to grow and growing, and, you know, for our chats too. This was a fire conversation, and I think that there is so much here that is worth continuing to explore in a part 3 and beyond, because I feel like I think one thing I love particularly about the work that I do is better understanding how the emotional state really does play a lot with the mental state. And I think just when people become more aware of that and also get to a stage where they also learn to feel safe in themselves, oh my God, watch the magic happen. You just realize, you just become so much more peaceful, and you also just realize too what really matters to you without getting caught in a froth over like what everything else, you know, has been telling you since childhood. So anyways, I'll wrap up my piece by saying thank you, loved it, would love to speak to you obviously on lives and as a friend. So
yeah.
very much.
Yes, and for the person who asked, this is my podcast. I do it through Instagram Live, so it will be saved. It's called Heal Through Humor. You'll see it on my page. You'll see it on Ken's page once it's shared. So no worries. This will be available for life. You can download it, save it, glean from it as you will. And until next time, I will see you soon.
Yes. Bye,
Bye.
Charles.